It was a bitterly cold night in the heart of December. Snowflakes fell like delicate whispers from the heavens, coating the ground in an icy, unyielding blanket. The town of Willow Creek was silent, save for the occasional howl of the wind that snaked through the trees, sending shivers down even the warmest of spines. By the side of a narrow, deserted road, a golden retriever named Toby trudged through the snow. His paws sank deep into the frost, and his breath came out in visible puffs. Toby wasn't just any dog. He was a loyal companion who had once brought endless joy to the Miller family. Now, he wandered alone, having been separated from his home weeks ago during a freak storm. But despite his own hardships, Toby's gentle heart never hardened. His kind eyes still sought out warmth, even in a world that had turned so cold. As Toby plodded through the snow, his ears perked up. A faint, muffled sound broke through the otherwise silent night, a soft cry. He stopped in his tracks, tilting his head to listen. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was the cry of a baby. Driven by instinct, Toby followed the sound, his paws quickening despite the frost biting at them. The cries grew louder as he approached a snowbank near an old wooden bridge. What he found there stopped him in his tracks, a bundle wrapped in a tattered blanket, half buried in the snow. The baby, no older than a few months, was shivering violently, its tiny face pale and lips tinged blue. It let out another weak cry, barely audible against the gusts of wind. Toby's heart raced. He understood, in a way only animals can, that this fragile life was teetering on the edge. Without hesitation, Toby nosed his way closer, using his body to shield the baby from the wind. His thick, golden fur provided a layer of warmth as he curled protectively around the child. But Toby knew that simply staying there wouldn't be enough. The baby needed help immediately. And so, with a determination that defied his small frame, Toby gently gripped the edge of the blanket in his teeth and began dragging the baby toward the faint light of a distant farmhouse. The path to the farmhouse was treacherous, with the snow piling higher by the minute. Toby's golden fur was damp from the relentless cold, and his paws ached from dragging the bundle across the icy terrain. Every step was a battle, but the soft whimpering of the baby spurred him onward. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. As Toby trudged on, the wind picked up, howling like a banshee and whipping snowflakes into his face. The farmhouse's light flickered faintly in the distance, a beacon of hope in the dark, but it felt impossibly far away. Toby's strength was waning, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Could he make it in time? Suddenly, the snow gave way beneath him. A hidden patch of ice sent Toby skidding, and he fell hard onto his side, the bundle slipping from his grasp. The baby let out a startled cry, its voice almost drowned out by the roaring wind. Toby scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in panic. He rushed to the baby, nudging the blanket with his nose to ensure the child was still protected. The baby's cries quieted, but its shivers grew more violent. Toby tried to pick up the bundle again, but the ice beneath them was unforgiving, making every movement a struggle. As he attempted to drag the baby further, a sharp pain shot through his paw, a cut from the jagged ice. Toby whimpered but didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. The storm intensified, and the farmhouse light seemed to flicker further away with each passing moment. Toby's vision blurred as exhaustion set in, but he pressed on, his instincts guiding him through the blinding snow. Just as despair began to creep in, a loud crack echoed through the air, the sound of a tree branch snapping under the weight of the snow. Toby froze, his ears twitching. The branch crashed to the ground mere feet away, sending snow spraying over them. The baby let out a piercing wail, and Toby knew he had no time to lose. Mustering every ounce of strength left in him, he picked up the bundle once more, his injured paw dragging behind him as he pushed forward. The farmhouse light was his only hope, and he would reach it or die trying. Toby limped through the storm, the weight of the baby pressing heavily against his aching body. The farmhouse light glimmered faintly in the distance, but every step felt like wading through quicksand. His injured paw throbbed with each movement, leaving small red stains in the pure white snow. The relentless wind tore at him, biting through his golden coat, but Toby refused to stop. He could feel the baby's tiny breaths growing fainter, and his heart clenched with fear. Halfway to the farmhouse, the storm reached its peak. Snow swirled violently, creating a blinding wall of white. Toby's instincts screamed at him to seek shelter, but there was none to be found. Every instinct he had as a dog told him to protect the fragile life in his care, no matter the cost. The baby let out another weak cry, barely audible over the howling wind. Toby whined in response, as if to reassure the child that they were not alone. But the odds seemed stacked against him. His body trembled from the cold, and his strength was fading fast. At one point, his legs buckled beneath him, sending him sprawling into the snow. He lay there for a moment, panting heavily, as the temptation to give up loomed large. But as he looked at the baby, swaddled in the blanket and helpless, something deep within him reignited, a fierce determination that would not be extinguished. With a low growl of resolve, Toby pushed himself up, gripping the edge of the blanket in his teeth once more. He began to move, inch by inch, ignoring the sharp pain in his paw and the sting of the icy wind. Meanwhile, inside the farmhouse, a young woman named Clara sat by the window, staring out into the storm. She had been knitting by the fire when a sudden, inexplicable unease had settled over her. Her eyes darted to the small light outside that marked the edge of her property. It flickered faintly, barely visible against the swirling snow. Clara's heart tightened. Something didn't feel right. Clara's husband, Henry, entered the room, carrying an armful of firewood. "The storm's worse than they predicted," he said, shaking the snow from his coat. "We'll be lucky if the power holds out." Clara didn't respond immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the storm outside. "Henry, I think there's something out there," she said finally, her voice tinged with worry. Henry frowned. "In this weather? Probably just the wind playing tricks." "No," Clara insisted, rising to her feet. "I have a feeling. We need to check." Reluctantly, Henry donned his coat and boots, grabbing a lantern. Clara followed him to the door, her breath visible in the cold air as they stepped onto the porch. The wind tore at their faces, and snow swirled around them. "Let's make it quick," Henry shouted over the wind. Clara nodded, and together they began scanning the area. Back in the storm, Toby was nearing the edge of his limits. His legs were shaking, and his breaths came in ragged gasps. The farmhouse light had grown closer, but it still felt miles away. He began to falter, his steps slowing as exhaustion clawed at him. Suddenly, a dark shape loomed in the distance. Toby froze, his heart racing. A coyote, drawn by the baby's cries, emerged from the trees, its yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. Toby stepped in front of the bundle, baring his teeth in a low growl. The coyote circled, its movements cautious but predatory. Toby barked fiercely, summoning strength he didn't know he had. The coyote lunged, but Toby was faster, snapping at its flank and sending it retreating into the storm. The encounter left Toby even more drained, but he didn't let himself dwell on the danger. He turned back to the baby, nudging the bundle gently to ensure it was safe. The baby let out a faint cry, and Toby felt a surge of relief. They were still alive, but they had to keep moving. As Toby dragged the baby closer to the farmhouse, a sudden beam of light pierced through the storm. It was faint, but unmistakable, a lantern. He let out a bark, his voice hoarse from the cold. The light paused, then began moving toward him. Clara's voice rang out faintly through the wind. "Henry, over there. I heard something." Toby barked again, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and desperation. The lantern light grew brighter, and Clara's figure emerged from the storm, her eyes widening in disbelief as she saw the dog and the tiny bundle he was dragging through the snow. "Oh my God," she whispered, rushing forward. "Henry, it's a baby." Toby collapsed into the snow, his body trembling as Clara scooped up the child. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with relief, before his exhausted body finally gave out. The storm raged as if the heavens themselves were testing Toby's will to survive. His body ached with fatigue, and his golden fur, once gleaming, was now matted and heavy with snow and ice. His breath came in short, ragged gasps, each exhale puffing out in frosty clouds. His injured paw was barely functioning, the sharp pain from earlier now a dull, constant throb. But through it all, Toby pressed on, his focus unwavering as he inched closer to the farmhouse. Clara had taken the baby inside to warm it, but Toby couldn't rest, not yet. He had one final stretch to cover, and he wasn't about to let his own suffering stand in the way of the child's safety. The snow was now waist-deep, and with every step, it felt as though the world itself was conspiring to stop him. His strength was nearly gone, but as he pushed forward, the image of the baby's small, pale face haunted him. He could not, would not, fail now. Suddenly, a distant rumble echoed through the storm, a sound that wasn't the wind. Toby's ears perked up, his heart racing. It was the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the snow. A shadow loomed ahead, a shape that grew steadily larger, and Toby's blood ran cold. It was the coyote again. This time, there was no hesitation in its approach. The coyote's eyes gleamed with hunger as it stalked toward Toby, its powerful frame cutting through the snow with ease. Toby's body trembled with exhaustion, but instinct took over. He stood his ground, lowering his body in a defensive stance, his teeth bared. The coyote growled menacingly, and Toby's heart pounded in his chest. The animal had a choice, stand and fight or flee. But there was no question in Toby's mind. He would not leave the baby behind. Not after everything they had been through. The coyote lunged with terrifying speed, its jaws snapping shut just inches from Toby's throat. With a powerful, desperate snarl, Toby managed to sidestep, using his teeth to grab the coyote's scruff. The two animals struggled in the deep snow, the coyote trying to shake Toby off with powerful jerks, but Toby held firm. Every ounce of his strength was focused on protecting the baby, the child who depended on him. A violent tug sent Toby sprawling backward, but he quickly regained his footing. He was bleeding now, his side torn by the coyote's claws, but he couldn't stop. Not now. The fight wasn't just for his own survival, it was for the baby, who still lay out there, vulnerable and helpless. The coyote lunged again, but just as it closed in on Toby, a new figure emerged from the swirling storm, Henry. With a loud shout, he threw himself between Toby and the coyote, swinging a branch he had picked up from the ground. The coyote hesitated, and Henry swung again, landing a blow to its side. The coyote yelped in pain, its instincts pulling it back into the storm. It turned and fled, leaving Toby victorious, but barely standing. Toby staggered to his feet, blood staining the snow beneath him. His muscles were on fire, his vision blurry from exhaustion. But he had won. He had kept the baby safe. With a final, weary look toward the farmhouse, Toby collapsed into the snow, knowing he had done all he could. Henry knelt beside Toby, his face filled with concern and admiration. He gently stroked the dog's fur, whispering soothing words. "You're a hero, Toby. You saved them." But Toby could barely keep his eyes open. The battle was over. He had done his job. And with that, he surrendered to the warmth of the moment, knowing the baby was safe, the family was safe, and his mission was complete. Henry gently scooped Toby up, his strong arms cradling the dog's frail body as he carried him toward the warmth of the farmhouse. Toby's once golden fur was now matted with blood and ice, and his breathing was shallow, but his eyes still held a spark of life. Clara stood at the door, her face pale with worry as she saw her husband carrying the dog inside. The baby, safely wrapped in blankets and resting by the fire, was now warm and content, its cries silenced by the comfort of the warmth and food Clara had provided. Henry lowered Toby onto a soft blanket by the hearth, his hands trembling from the chill in the air and the fear of what might come next. Clara rushed to Toby's side, her heart breaking at the sight of the brave dog. She gently stroked his fur, her voice soothing as she whispered, "You're safe now, Toby. You did it. You saved us." Toby let out a soft whine, his eyes closing as he finally allowed himself to relax, knowing the battle was over. Clara carefully tended to his wounds, cleaning the cuts and bandages as best she could, while Henry stoked the fire to ensure the warmth filled the room. Toby's body relaxed under their care, the tension melting away. For the first time in hours, Toby felt safe. He had done everything he could, and now he could rest. Clara gave him a soft smile, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. "You're our hero, Toby," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. And as the storm raged outside, Toby drifted off to sleep, surrounded by warmth and love, his heart finally at peace, knowing the baby was safe and his mission was complete. Days passed, and the storm eventually subsided, leaving the farmhouse surrounded by a quiet, peaceful blanket of snow. Inside, the warmth from the fire crackled, and the comforting hum of family life filled the air. Toby, now healed and strong once again, sat by the fire with Clara and Henry. His fur had grown softer as they nursed him back to health, and his eyes, once clouded with exhaustion and fear, now sparkled with contentment. The baby had grown stronger as well, nestled safely in Clara's arms, its tiny fingers grasping her hand. Toby watched over the child, his eyes full of affection and devotion. The bond between them was undeniable, and every time the baby cooed or smiled, Toby's heart swelled with love. He had done it. He had saved a life, and now, in return, he had a family who loved him. The days were brighter now. Toby had earned his place in the family's heart, and his every moment was filled with the joy of being home. He had a warm bed, food, and, most importantly, the love of a family who cherished him. His story was no longer one of survival or struggle. It was a tale of triumph, loyalty, and unwavering love. Henry smiled as he watched Toby nudge the baby's blanket with his nose, his tail wagging. "He's one special dog," he murmured to Clara, who smiled back, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. Toby's heart swelled as he nestled closer to his family. The fear, the cold, the loneliness, all were now distant memories. He was home, and he was loved. And as Toby lay by the fire, content and happy, the viewers were left with a sense of hope, knowing that there are many animals out there who still need a home, a family, and a chance to love and be loved in return.